With that, Ted, I'm going to let you introduce our program for tonight.
Yeah, so for tonight, we have three videos to share with you on small projects. So with the holidays coming up, seems like a good month to do this because everybody's trying to make little gifts or whatever for their family and friends, or maybe even to sell or whatever. And so we picked out three different topics and three different demonstrators, all our own members. And so the first one up will be Jeff Danneman with his dreidel. And Jeff has been a member, and most of you probably know Jeff, of course. He did a demonstration for us last year on finishing, so on dyes and paints and so forth. And that one was really great. And so he's going to show us his technique for doing dreidel tonight. And then following him will be Norm, our vice president of the club, and I'm sure most of you know Norm as well. He's been a member for I think 12 years or more, and he did a demonstration for us last year on small projects. So all the kind of small things that he does, and he's going to share the potpourri bowl with us and how he makes that tonight on that. And then the last video we have is with Meryl Valnes, and Meryl works, as I mentioned earlier, I think that he works at Klingspor, and he's been a member of our club for quite a while, been turning for 20 plus years, I think, maybe longer. And he also did a demonstration for us last December on chip carving. Most of you that came to that meeting, I'm sure, enjoyed seeing that work as well from him. So that's our three demonstrators, and it'll go in that order.
Hi, I'm Jeff Danneman with the Woodturners Guild of North Carolina. Today we're going to do a demonstration of the Chanukah Dreidel. Brief history of Hanukkah. The Greeks and their Syrian surrogates ruled Jerusalem. The Israelis revolt, run them out, reclaim the temple. They were going to relight the lights in the temple, the menorah. They found one vial of oil. That'll last one day. It takes 8 days to make more. So they light the menorah with the one vial of oil, and lo and behold, it worked for 8 days. That's the miracle of Hanukkah. In Hebrew, Nesh Gadol Hayim Shem. So we use this dreidel with the acronyms Nun, Gimel, Hey, Shem to play a game. Everybody antes up. Today we're using coin-shaped chocolate wrapped in gold-colored foil. You ante up, spin the dreidel. If you get a gimel, you take the pot. A hay, you get half the pot. Nun, you get nothing. And Shem, you have to put money in. That's the Hanukkah version. If you make these things, you could make up your own game, put your own letters on. Traditionally, square cut, round bottom. When we do tops, we want to keep the center of gravity low. Here we're doing a top-heavy top. So we do the rounded bottom, and it'll spin pretty well. What I see today is an awful lot of artistic top dreidel. We're going to show you some pictures here. This first piece is an inside-out turning dreidel in a dreidel on a cherry base. This next piece is done in big leaf maple with layered dies. And this third piece is a Malay burl the size of a pin blank turned into a very tall, skinny dreidel. So we really want this kind of shape for playing games, and 1 1/4 by 1 1/4 works well. I've seen them T90. But when we go artistic, all the rules are gone. Today I'm going to go 1 7/8 by 1 7/8, a little bigger, make it easier to film. These do get a little bit trickier to spin. You've got to stay straight up and down, and don't, and it'll work. What we want to do is start with a square blank, 2x2 machine down square, marked dead center. Here we want to go Duxbury measured, right on the money. I'm going to start between centers. We're in Ted's shop and I'm not used to his lathe. We're here because Jill said we couldn't use my garage. She didn't want anybody to see the mess. And the acronym is SAFER. Speed, aim, fasten, eyewear, rotate. Face shield somewhere. So I'm going to use a 3/8 beating and parting tool. That's the right thickness for the jaws on the chuck. Turn about 2,000. We're not going to do a Jimmy Cruise on this thing. If you come in from just below center to start, you don't get quite as many fuzzies. And with this chuck, I know that when I get just round, I'll grab the jaws right. And you can also get a little hint looking at these as to whether you're on center, and we look to be right on the money. So we're gonna now, I didn't get a deep shoulder all the way around, and you wouldn't. So what I'm going to do is center the high points right in the middle of the jaws. That'll give me the most hold I can get. So we're going to start up again slow and out of the way. We want to keep these edges nice and sharp. We can do that with gentle cuts. A nice crisp edge there. This live center is going to get in the way real soon, and I'll show you why I use it anyway in a little bit. And that's about as far in as we're going to get with that live center. And we're going to switch to a spindle gouge. try to take cubic light. One point here, gentlemen, when I'm trying to make that cut, I use a technique I learned doing square bowls. A lot of the times I'll put the bevel on the rounded part. It's anchor bevel cut. You can find the bevel on that rounded part a lot easier than on the square part to the spindle. And then I'll ease back until it starts to chatter and I know I'm on the square part. Shift the tool a tiny bit and make my cut. All right, Steve.
All right.
Ooh. And let's see where we are. Sharp edges, decent rounded shape. Maybe a little more on there. I'll take it. When I do get a little chatter in this end grain, I'll clean it up with a freshly sharpened skew. This was the last side sharpened, so the burr's up, dead center, and I can take care of that little nib real easy, clean up any mess I've got here. Today, little 220 grit and we're in business. The reason I like this live center is I can knock the point out and I can bring it up. I use this piece of rubber. This is the strip that you put at the bottom of your garage door. I bought a roll of it on these sharp edges. I can protect my piece and use tailstock support while I cut the handle. It's kind of important because you've got a lot of weight out here and it's going to want to rock and roll on you. We're going to come up maybe 1 7/8. Nah. 1 3/4 or so. I'm going to go a little under square. We're going to remember that every line we draw is another line we're going to have to either sand off or erase, so we're not going to get overly aggressive. This parting tool will make a real nice entry cut. Should keep this edge reasonably square. I need to come up a touch on the tool rest. We're going to sneak up on my line. And let's check my spot. Ooh, nice and crisp. Choice of tool to make this cut with is, kind of personal preference. No right, no wrong, as long as you get a good cut. We've got a lot of waste wood here. Figure 1.5 inches on the handle, ought to be plenty. Since my block was a little short to start with, we might not be able to get a stand out of it, but that's okay. To tell the truth, gentlemen, I usually start with a 2x2x6 block of wood from Woodcraft. They've always got a bucket full of them cheap. I got over to Ted's shop with everything I could possibly need except the wood. I left my prepared blanks at the house. We found this piece of cherry at Ted's shop and he cut it down for me. If you start with a full 6-inch piece, you've usually got enough left at the end to make some kind of stand. Just dish out the end, hold the dreidel, reverse it and clean it up and you're in business. See?
I didn't charge you for that wood yet either, did I, Jeff?
As we often say, Ted, good luck with that. So we've got a real nice crisp entry cut. May want to come back a little bit more. A lot of wood to waste. And we'll finish up with a spindle gouge, he says. Oh. Here, having the tailstock support really comes in handy, or this thing would be doing some wobbling. Let's see where I am. Not bad. I'm going to leave this end of the stem a little fat so I can put a decoration on it. Can't get in here with a skew to effectively clean this up. So we're going to try one more pass, nice end grain cut. Looks a little long to me. Still looks a bit long, and I'm more done than I want.
Question, you want to pause it a sec? Raymond Schwartz is asking, are you trying to match the curves top and bottom?
Since we're stopped, no, more often than not, I cut straight across the top and get that part flat to keep the center of gravity down as far as you can, unless you're being filmed, in which case you can screw up just about anything. Couple other points here. I leave that stem fat so I can have enough wood there to play with the shape just a little bit, which is what I'm having to do here. And so Steve won't have to stop us again in another minute or two. You'll see when I get in trying to finish that stem up, they teach us to shift our weight right, left, and move the tool. When I get into a tight space like that and my hand's getting kind of close to that chuck, I tend to just rotate from the shoulders and kind of extend the tool out, sort of like you do finishing up the bottom of a bowl. I'm more comfortable with that cut, and it gets me to the same place. Clean that up with a little sandpaper if we wanted to, but not during demos. What you find is when you try to part off something that's bottom heavy like that, you tend to make a mess. Discretion is the better part of valor. And we'll take it. Stem needed to be longer. When you letter these, what I like to do is put Seal-A-Cell or the equivalent on them, something solvent resistant and chemical resistant. Then I'm going to use one of these oil-based marking pens. These
You want me to stop there, Jeff?
No, we're good.
All
Well, yeah, let's go ahead. Rub off or come off easily. They wear well. The reason for the Seal-A-Cell is when you mess up your lettering, you can take this off with a little alcohol and a cotton ball. Most of us aren't real good with Hebrew letters. So what I do is give myself a grid to work with, and practice makes perfect, or in my case, practice makes acceptable. And we're going to wind up with something more or less like this. Thank you. Couple of points here. I'm not real good with those marking pens. That oil-based pen came from Michael's. I wound up taking off quite a few letters. If you put Seal-A-Cell on that wood, let it dry for a day or two, then put the oil-based marker on. When you wipe it off, you don't leave a shadow. If you put that oil-based marker straight on the wood and have to take it back off, it's going to leave a shadow. So the oil-based pens from Michael's work, and seal the wood first.
Wait a minute. Oh, sorry. Oh. Sorry, Jeff.
No, we're
Go
good.
ahead.
Questions for Jeff?
If you put a couple, inlay a couple BBs in one side and offset the bottom point towards that, it'll come up a winner every time.
That's a
I
good
actually
idea.
had a discussion with the rabbi about putting gimmels all the way around so you do nothing but take the pot, but she said no.
Nice job.
Sounds like a comment from a guy who's made loaded dice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you notice that some of the camera sometimes was a little bit not where it needs to be. That's my fault. We had set the cameras up perfectly, and then I moved the headstock in towards the center for Jeff, so he had more space underneath the lathe for his feet. Forgot about the cameras. So in the first part of it, we were off a little bit. There were the cameras, and also his face shield got in the way a couple of times there. So apologize for that. We didn't realize some of that until after we got to the editing point. So
I think we did great. You know, you managed to shoot from the top and not show my ball spot. I mean, what more could you want?
All right.
Thanks, Jeff. Good job. Thank you. All right.
Hello, I'm going to tell you about these small potpourri bowls that I make, especially around the holidays, as a way to get the most out of a small piece of exotic wood. These pewter lids can be picked up from Craft Supply or a couple of other suppliers for as little as $4 to $5 each. And they really dress up a small bowl and turn it into something that immediately draws the eye. And as I said, they make wonderful holiday gifts. So here's my process. So this is some of the smaller pieces of wood that I've done with these, and I basically just take some quick measurements. These things are about 3 inches. They're never the same dimension twice, and they're never perfectly round. Pewter is a fairly soft metal, so you'll have some variation. My goal is always to make sure I leave enough wood on the outside to, well, impact the design, if you will. So I take a quick measure to see how much I've got on the outside. And I assess the figure of the wood. I make a mistake here. I don't know if you can spot it, but I saw that beautiful figure at the top of the wood and forgot that, well, that'll be gone by the time I cut the hole in it. But I continue anyway. Here I'm just kind of marking out generally the shape I expect to make out of the piece. I don't always do that, but it's a good practice, especially when the piece is borderline too small for this project. I don't think I've done one of these as small as that little piece of wood. This other piece of big leaf maple I'm working on, I won't turn that in this video, but I will show the marking process. Again, I'm looking for figure. On this one, there really isn't any unique figure that's specific to a certain area. These pieces of wood are so small, I will often start the whole process between centers and not even bother with the screw chuck. But why not? I'm home here, I'm comfortable, so I might as well just get a screw truck going so I don't have to worry about the holding of this piece. Again, my drill bit is just a hair smaller than that, I believe 3/8 screw chuck. And the key here is just to make sure the hole is at least deep enough so the screw doesn't jam up. And again, just hand mounting it on here. And with a screw chuck, it's a matter of making sure that you are dead set against the jaws, which I'm doing here. very small piece of wood. As you can see, I could have easily put this between centers. I wouldn't have had a lot of room to work, but I wouldn't have had any risk of the piece flying off that I could imagine. I know this is a bad angle for you. I discover it and fix it in a few seconds. But this is my go-to tool. It's a 5/8 inch bowl gouge, ground to, I don't know the degree, but it's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 degrees, and it's a flat grind, not a fingernail grind. I like using these because they are super easy to sharpen. Just drop it in the pocket and rotate. Here I just took the caliper to my chuck to make sure I can leave enough of an indent. The shape of this means I'm going to do a foot instead of a recess. If it were really short, sometimes I do a recess with these. And now I'm doing mainly push cuts to just start to work out the shape. On this one I have to be a little bit more finicky because I don't have a lot of excess wood. So I'm dancing between the shape I like and enough wood to support that lid. So you'll see me constantly checking on it. Nice thing is this is soft maple, so you can get away with it. I like to form my foot with a skew chisel. Small skew chisel lets me get tight in those corners, especially if it's a dovetail, but in my case this won't be dovetail, it'll be a flat jaw. But that skew lets me work on each corner one at a time instead of trying to jam the whole thing into the opening. And I get a nice clean cut every time. I'm going back to just finding round on this piece. Got to get all the way to the top side. It's looking a little tall, so I'll do something with the shape at the top. These tend to look good if you go for a slightly closed form. In other words, a more spherical bowl than an open one. But I'm going to run out of wood here because there just isn't enough space. I'm even checking here and say, well, if I get enough wood to support that lid, I'm barely in that neighborhood. But I have an out. If I shorten the bowl, I will get a wider dimension that I can work with. Just more shaping. So this, I think I've gone to my Ellsworth gouge here. Once I do the rough work, I'll go to the better tool, if you will, to allow me to do a little shear scraping, a little fine tuning, get a nice clean cut. The bowl work was done with a tool that's easy to sharpen, so that this way my big Ellsworth will stay sharper longer because I'm not beating it up, chopping away big chunks of wood. I often do these projects, I discovered, when I'm actually at a market and I have the lathe because they're quick. I can knock one of these out in well under an hour, and it's not complex to the point where I worry about being interrupted. So I got the foot formed, putting it in. This is Titan jaws, not Titan. I forget what chuck this is, but it's the Talon, small jaws on a Talon. Straight jaws, as you know, and with my foot I'm just making sure it's centered. And two things there: I push in the center as I lock the jaws down. Don't rattle it, don't rock back and forth with your hand because you're more likely to get off center that way. And then you may have noticed I was just using the tool, the chuck key, rubbing against the pieces it was spinning just to confirm I was in good alignment. Now here you see me, I was checking the width. I do not have a lot of wood to work with here. So I'm going to clear out my top surface, get that wax off, and see what I've got to work with. And I'm fairly soon going to make the discovery that I really don't have enough diameter to support that lid at this height. But there's an easy fix for that. This is mistake number 14. I really focus on the shape a lot. To me, that's one of the most important. First and foremost is getting the right shape. Second is quality of cut. But in this case, second is, well, form and function. It's got to fit the lid sooner or later. So sooner or later, something has to be sacrificed. But right now, I'm focusing on the shape because I want a pleasing shape. Once I get the shape I want, then I'll do whatever I have to make the lid fit, and then it's a matter of focusing on getting quality cuts. So it looks like I'm not going to have enough wood for this thing to hang over the edge or rest on top. So it'll probably have to be an inset. But even that, I want at least a 1/16 of an inch, if not more, wood on the outside to support it. How do I find that? Well, if I go deeper into the bowl, the diameter becomes wider, so it gives me a little more room.
Is that dry wood,
Sacrifices
Norm?
height of the bowl.
It was waxed, so I didn't put a meter to it, but I would guess that it was somewhere in the under 30% range. I wasn't getting any moisture as I cut into it, but maple always seems to hold a little bit of moisture.
Okay, thanks.
Consider some of my shape. With soft maple like this, I do find I can do a lot of this scraping, shaping, and it doesn't really do too much damage to the wood. At some point I will shift over and do a little shear scraping, especially with this big Ellsworth gouge. It's got enough shoulder that I can do that. But for me, it's a very subtle thing. I just slowly roll the tool so that I go from a scraping to an actual cutting motion. Again, I will constantly check the dimensions on these things. Now there are, you will notice I'm measuring, there are little buttons inside. So you have an option of sitting the whole lid in or sitting on those buttons. The problem with those buttons, though, is that there are 3 of them, so it's very difficult to get a full measure on them. And as I said, they're never perfect dimensions. They're always off a little bit, which can be a little frustrating if you're going for perfection. But remember, wood moves, so you're never going to get a perfect bowl once it truly dries. And pewter is soft enough that it can accommodate that wood movement, and you can actually, with your fingers and a little care, reshape it a little bit if you have to. Or a ball peen hammer, you can basically knock down one of the high edges a little bit so it wouldn't even be noticeable. So thin parting tool, just working on that, where I'm going to fit that shoulder. I think I'm actually attempting to make a shoulder for those 3 feet. That's what I'm pointing out here, those 3 little...
Did someone have a question?
Yeah. How did you start that cut to go into the bowl there, Norm? Did you use a point tool or a beading tool?
It was a pyramid tool, which I think I'll mention in a little bit.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll use a parting tool. The point tool, I don't know, it just feels more comfortable. It's like putting a skew in.
All right.
Little buttons. I'll tell you right now, it doesn't work out that way, but I'm trying to find a spot where that fits. That would give me a nice solid base on which for this thing to sit. But because it moves so much, I've already missed the hole I wanted. I'm going to convert and just go for a lip into which the entire piece will sit. So I'll just ignore those 3 feet. They won't be helping. Now I do have to make sure I've cleared enough of the wood so that I can sit past those little 3 button feet. Again, I have my skew here just because it lets me work in the tightest possible corner. And boom, I've got the seat. Now, I never want to make these tight fits. This is not a box lid fit because the wood will move and the pewter will not. So you will end up having it get stuck. And often, see how I'm rotating it in the piece? You'll notice that because it's not a perfect round, and often wood isn't a perfect round either, it will basically be sticky in one dimension and loose in the other. So you want to make sure you're testing it on the full spectrum. But once the lid is fitted, now it's just a bowl project. I don't really need any kind of a lip here. I mean, just enough to hold the metal. It doesn't have to be an 1/8 or more. A 16th or even a 32nd might be enough to hold that lid in place. And because this opening is so close to the edge, this is not a hollowing project. Sometimes, as you can see from my other designs, these are a hollowing project. I have to reach in under that rim. But generally, I've got a close to 3-inch opening hole here. A bowl gouge is going to let me do if not every bit of the inside, 90% of it, and I won't need to use a hollowing tool for anything except perhaps right inside the throat if it were a wider piece. Constantly checking for wall thickness here. I just want an even wall thickness. I don't sweat it. It does not need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be super thin. Just because I want to show you this, if this required hollowing, this is the kind of tool I would use. This is a Jimmy Clues hollower. Really handy. comes already skewed, and I'm only using it here to show. It's not necessary. As you can see, I can reach deep enough under that shoulder that I don't need to do this. But if I had to, I could swing that tool all the way around. This tool is a gem. It cuts only on center, and there's one trick to this tool, and you just have to really believe me, because it'll bite you. Only move forward. You will get away with pulling back with this tool a little bit. And if you're across the bottom center, you can go back and forth across the bottom center. Not a problem. That's fine. But see how I'm progressing down that wall? It's working very well. If I start to go backwards up the wall, it will work a little bit. But at some point, too much of that round cutter will engage the wood wall, and it will bite, and it'll bite hard, and it'll throw you. Jimmy points that out in the tool, and you just basically it feels like it'll be okay. So you'll try it from time to time. But trust me, sooner or later it will bite you, and it's just not worth the trouble. Just remember to go forward only, and you'll be perfectly fine. I'm hanging with this tool because it is, as a nice clean carbide cutter, it does give you a good surface on the inside most of the time. Because it's held at that angle by the design of the tool, you're getting more of a shear scraping cut. I don't give you a close-up of the inside, but that surface is pretty good. Again, one of the...
The liar.
You're out there. I'll admit it. One of the nice things about this project is it's not meant to be food safe. It's meant for scented potpourri, or for candy, hard candy to be put in. No one's going to be serving soup in this or trying to serve food out of it. You tell them that when they buy it. So for that reason, I generally won't even put a finish on the inside. I will seal it with some sanding sealer, one coat, and that's it. But I will not spend a lot of time perfecting the inside of these bowls. So I think I started with, like that, I know that says 220, but I started with, I think, 150 or 180 on this ambrosia maple. It's pretty soft wood. I'm just double checking the cut, the fit of the lid. And again, I want it to be a little loose. I don't want that to suddenly grab 3 months down the road. So I want it to basically rest in place, but easily pop out without any effort. And here I've got my Sealacell. I decant it into these small little bottles so it lasts a little longer. And of course the bottle gums up sometimes, but I don't use a lot. I'm hitting the outside first. I do this after sanding, but before doing a sanding polish. Seems to work pretty well in that order. This coat is so thin, with the lathe on, it'll dry in under 2 minutes. And it raises the grain enough that when I do either triple EEE, or another sanding paste, it gives me a really nice finish. Trickiest thing here is getting it into the corner of that fitting, because it can be sometimes the end grain will not grasp it that quickly. Again, this is meant to be a quick little project. If I'm spending way too long on the finishing time, it's just not worth it for me. I tend to get between $30 and $40 for one of these if I can at a market. They tend to go pretty well at that rate, depending on the species and size. Don't charge a lot. Don't put a lot into them. As I say, that pewter lid draws the eye, and women in particular tend to find these in a stack of wooden bowls all the time. They have to pick them up. So I'm just putting a little finish on the inside. Okay, now you didn't see it, but I waited about 2 minutes, and I've gone to the, in this case, I've got Axe abrasive paste. Now that wood is dry, it's not tacky. So as soon as I hit it with this stuff, it'll polish up nicely, take care of those slightly raised fibers that I've already sanded down to at least 220. I usually take these up to 300 to 400 grit sanding, depending again on the wood. sometimes with ambrosia maple, it's really not worth going beyond 220 or 300. I always use a paper towel with these. If you're going to get caught on a spinning lathe, you want paper so that it will break away and not pull you in. Obviously, most of this video is running at 10 times speed. I don't work this fast, even when I'm caffeinated. I do get lost in these little projects, especially if you're doing a number of them in a row. But see, I got a nice shine on that. I'm basically feeling it for any rough spots, and not feeling too many at all. Again, it's not a big bowl. I'm not going to charge a lot. I do not go after perfection here. I just want it to look and feel good. It's almost more of a feel than a look in this case. The look is going to get them to it, but it's when they pick it up and they feel the nice smooth finish, the weight of that pewter lid. That's what sells these pieces. Here's the best part of these. When you're done, you never have to worry about fancy holdings because you have made a box lid. You have a straight edge lid already that you don't even mind if you mar it a little bit. In this case, I just put a paper towel over my jaws and I open my jaws inside the recess. It's guaranteed solid straight holding. All I have to worry about is not, of course, cranking my jaws open against it and splitting the piece open. But that's not a lot of pressure. That was my pyramid tool. I like to use that to start and do a lot of work on the foot. Lets me get in the corners kind of like a skew at all angles. Thank you, Alan Leland, for helping me make that tool years ago. Now I'm just using a very small, I guess a 1/4 inch bowl gouge that is badly in need of reshaping. It's gotten out of hand on me, but it was little, sharp-ish and handy, so I used it. Again, there's that pyramid tool. See how it lets me work on all angles, kind of like a skew? I can get in really close. I can make those detailed grooves with it. I can do a little rounding of the foot. And I'm switching angles left and right just because I want those grooves to look purposeful, not just cuts. So by rocking it from the right and then doing it from the left, I get a nice V groove, not just a slice into the wood. And this piece is so small, I might not even have room to shine it, so it's nice to be able to dress up the bottom just a little bit with some grooves or something. And now I'm just, again, sanding that unfinished portion on the bottom of the bowl. And I'll give it the same treatment. A little sealing. And I'll go out with the abrasive wax. And that's pretty much how it's done. Not a lot of time. Didn't mar that surface at all. Didn't have a lot of wood to work with here. It's a really small bowl. It's not tiny, but it's small by bowl standards. And sometimes I'll try a different lid, try the different styles. They're all about the same size, and because again the tolerances are fairly soft, and I don't make a super tight fit, I can often change the lids out. Not all the time, but most of the time I can say, oh, this lid looks better. The hummingbirds are always a big seller. The butterflies go really nicely too. There are different styles of them. And you want it to be able to just sit in that cavity nicely and come out by just fingertip grab. You don't want it to shake out or fall out. And that's the piece. I've made a bunch of them. This one, as you say, this wood was barely big enough to hold them. Well, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you make some of these yourself.
Thanks, Ted. I just wanted to mention that after I did this, I went online and in the chat, I put a couple links to sources to get these little lids. They are currently on sale at, I think, Penn State. where they end up being, if you get 6 of them, you pay $3 a piece. So worth the investment. You can hold on for a while. There's a bunch of different styles. I have found that the anything with a hummingbird is almost a guaranteed to go. They seem to be a favorite of folks. Rita asked if I ever supply my own potpourri, and I did once when I had some freshly cut cedar shavings. I threw them in the bowl and called that potpourri, but generally no.
So I have a question for you, Norm. So the wood, it seems like it would need to be dry if you're fitting that lid on there. If it was green wood,
Right.
you'd end up, it'd be getting distorted possibly on you, right?
Right. It's a factor of size. So the smaller the piece, the more it can be a little bit wet without going too wonky. If I were doing a larger piece, I'd want it to be really dry, or I'd make it the lid fit really loose, knowing that it was gonna move a bit.
Yeah.
But generally, yeah, you want it to be. It's a matter of scale here in North Carolina. You're never going to get anything completely dry, but certainly you want to be in the under 30% range, or you're going to have serious trouble. And again, it's not important to have thin walls, but it is important to have consistent walls. If you have that old bowl problem where you start really thin and then it gets fat quickly, that's going to crack on you almost guaranteed. So a consistent wall thickness is important, but I've done them where they're well over 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch thick and have not had a problem with them. And I've done them thinner. Again, for me, it's about, does it look pretty on the outside? Is it not too heavy? Then I'm done.
Yeah, I like the lid inset like you ended up doing it. It looks a lot cleaner to me than if you would have had it sticking up on top of it with on those pegs. So I like the way that you did it.
Well, thanks. What I've noticed on the design of those, if you are going to have it sitting on top, you really spend more time on the curve because you want to look at the curve of the lid because they do vary a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to make sure that your form, if it sits on top, will follow that curve. You don't want a sharp curve that turns into a flat curve all of a sudden. So yeah, I always keep the lids close by as I'm working on the piece because you want to kind of visualize what's going to happen with the final factor.
Norm, do you to get that seal cell to dry in 2 minutes, do you run the lathe and put a paper towel on to generate some heat? I've never had seal cell dry in 2 minutes.
I mean, you saw the quantities I was putting on there.
Right.
It just dries. I mean, if it's raining out and the garage is open, it won't dry in 2 minutes, but it's usually 2 minutes. And if I go back and it's not dry, I'll turn it on 500 and leave it there for another minute, and the speed and the air movement does the job.
Well, and you said it was times 10.
Yeah.
So that'd be 5,000. Yeah. I'll have to try that, but I usually let seal cell dry overnight. But I'll have to give that a try.
Actually, Chris Borner taught me that. We were at a demo once, and he would do it. Just quickly seal up the wood. I mean, it is a sanding sealer, so it's not necessarily meant to be a full-time finish. And I don't normally finish these completely. I mean, I may put them on the buffer and put some carnauba on them. A couple of them I have done some spray lacquer, but I generally don't put a lot of time into putting a special finish on the outside, just something durable. And carnauba wax is usually a good solution.
Okay. Well, good. All right. Well, thank you, Norm.
Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Meryl Valnes. I've been a member of the Woodturners Guild for just about 10 years now. Tonight we're going to do a project that
The audio seems a little low, Steve.
something like this,
All right.
where you cut the rings loose and they all fall freely, and when you tip it upside down, it doesn't fall off. Basically what I do is I start with a piece, this happens to be a scrap piece of cherry. When you're looking for wood to make these things, you should look for wood that's relatively
void free or of any defects. You don't want any knots in it, so that if you happen to, a knot happens to fall on one of the rings, they don't break apart. I learned how to make these Christmas trees from a good friend of mine. His name is Phil Holton. He's from Minneapolis, and he's been doing these trees for a very, very long time. So let's just get started. We're going to go through the whole process. I am going to take some shortcuts. Typically when I put a finish on, I put 3 coats on. For this demonstration, I'll put just 1. So first thing that we got to do is take a piece of material and go from there. Typically what I start with is something that's 2 by 2. This happens to be cherry, and we'll get started. I always put my tree with it in the chuck, because when you get ready to do the final tip of it, we're going to want to pull the tailstock away, but we still want to have it held. So let's get started. First thing that I usually do is part off the end where the chuck, so I have room for the tool to get in there. Now we're going to make the piece round. Some of the tools that we're going to be using today, of course, is a spindle roughing gouge, a spindle gouge, a skew chisel, of course the parting tool, a scraper, a couple of specialty tools. I have a thin parting tool that I'll use at the very end to part the tree base off and let the tree stand free. One of the other tools that I use will be a skew chisel that I have modified. You can't get a hold of a 1/4 inch skew chisel, so I took a 1/2 inch skew chisel and ground it off so that I can have a very small skew chisel, and you'll see where I use this. The last tool that we're going to be using will be a captive ring cutting tool. I have modified this tool so that I can get in there. When the tool came, it had a little bit of a Y point right in here, and I just took it to the grinder and ground it to a fine point, and also made it flat here, and you'll see how I use that in just a little bit. All right, now's the time that we have to make the tree, the square piece, round.
I thought I was fast.
All right, once you have the piece round, one of the first things you have to do is decide out where the base and the trunk is going to be. So we're going to say that the base is right here, and the trunk is going to meet the canopy right about here. At this time, I also like to define it so that when I get to this part, I don't have to worry about it. So this will be where the trunk of the tree will be, and we'll go from there. Now at this time I have to make the tree itself in the shape of a cone, something like this. So I'll start with that. Once you have the tree in the shape of a cone, then you're going to start forming your rings. Now, the way I like to do it is I like to define where the top is going to be and where the last ring will be. This particular ring right here will be fixed. once you got the top and the bottom defined, with the rings, I like to make them as thin as I possibly can, something around 1/8 of an inch thick. And what I'll do is do 1.5 thicknesses of the parting tool between each ring. Basically just define where the rings are and then go back after I've got all the rings defined and touch them up, because you want the inside of the tree to be in the same shape as the outside. If you'll notice that I'm holding my skew so I'm not going straight in, I'm kind of going in at an angle to follow the shape of the tree. If you want to, you can measure out each one of the rings. I just do it by guessing by golly.
I have a question for Meryl.
Yep.
So are you just eyeballing your depth on this, or is there a point on the parting tool that you know to stop?
Oh, I just basically eyeball it. Basically what I do at the top, between the top of the tree and the first ring, my thickness is going to be somewhere right around 1/4 of an inch on the inside of the tree. And then I just basically follow it all the way up the tree.
Got it. Thanks.
Once I've got the rings defined, then I'll go back and refine it. I like the rings to be at least 1/4 of an inch thick. So I'll just go through and make sure that these are all the correct thicknesses and matching up the outside shape of the tree to the inside shape of the tree. The depth that I'm going is about 3/8 of an inch thick or 3/8 of an inch deep. This way it'll give the rings plenty of body to them. And from time to time you may have to go back and adjust the depth between each ring to get them so that they're relatively close. Alright, that looks pretty good. Now, what you have to do right now is, because once we cut the rings loose, they won't be able to, you can finish them, but it's pretty difficult. So at this time, I sand all the rings and I'll put at least one coat of finish on each one of the rings. And then I'll also take off the sharp edges on each one of the rings. And I will go through all my sanding grits. For spindles, I usually start at 100, go to 150, 220, 320, and 400, and then I'll use some non-woven pads to refine the surface of each one of the rings. I also use in most of my projects these non-woven rings that give a refined finish to the piece that you're working on. So I'll use them in this order, which is burgundy, which is the equivalency of 2/0 steel wool, green, which is 3/0 steel wool, gray, which is 4/0 steel wool, and the white one is for polishing. Once you've gone through all your sanding process, then I put a couple. Typically, what I'll do is I'll put on 3 coats, waiting about 5 or 10 minutes between each coat. And the finish that I'm using is just Danish oil. Alright, for the time being, I'm done with the finish. Now comes time to actually part off the rings, and like I said, I modified the captive ring tool that I got. The one that I like to use is Hamlin. It has a bigger ring cutter on it, and like I said, I modified it so that it comes to a tip with a relatively flat bottom, so I can ride it along the inside edge of the piece. All you got to do is just there's one ring. I typically cut off 3 rings and then touch up things. Okay.
Meryl, can you just run through the dimensions again? So there is it about a 1/4 inch apart, you said, between the rings, but are they all the same depth?
Well, yes and no. The distance between the rings, I have a 1/4 inch thick parting tool, and I usually use about 1.5 thicknesses of the parting tool.
All right, so it's about 3/8 between the rings. Okay.
Yeah, well, yeah, something like that.
Okay, approximately, yeah.
Yeah, the depth of the ring, you need the ring itself needs to be at least 1/4 inch thick from the center to the top of each ring. You know, they'll be about 1/4 inch because I'm using a 1/4 inch captive ring tool.
Okay. Because I'd imagine that there has to be some consistency, so when you stand it up, that the rings are somewhat evenly spaced, or even close, so they're not stacking up on top of each other, right?
Yeah, well, you know, I have got them stacked on top of each other before, but
Okay.
for the most part, once you've done this a couple of times, you can get it so the rings are pretty evenly stacked. It just depends on how careful you are at taking off too much material on the inside of the tree.
Okay. All right.
What is your lathe speed? I'm thinking it's pretty fast, isn't it? 3,000 or so?
I'm running a 1900 to 2100, something in there. I turn it as fast as possible.
Hey, then I have a question, Merle, on the tool there. So it looks like you're going in on the first cut of the ring with the tool flat, but on the opposite side, it looks like you're rolling that tool in there from the, you know, you start out with a point up, I guess, and then curves into it, down
That's
into
correct.
it. Is that correct?
That's correct, is because I don't want to hit the ring that I'm going to cut next.
Okay.
Because the rings
Right.
will fall back towards the top of the tree, so you have plenty of room coming in from the top side to the downside. but the rings are fixed, so it gets a little bit tricky to get it in, so I just kind of roll it in there.
I see. Okay. That explains it. Thanks.
Anybody have any other questions while we're paused here? All right, well, we'll continue on then.
Here is where that skew chisel that I modified comes in. Because you're always going to have some little nubs here, you kind of have to take them off. And a standard skew chisel, 3/4 or a half, is a little bit too big, so that's why I modified this skew chisel. You just basically take off any nubs or anything that you have in there. Now it's just a matter of continuing till you get all the rings parted off.
You ever lose a ring? And do you admit it?
Oh, about every third one. That right there. Sometimes that happens, where you bust a ring off. How often does that happen? Oh, about once every third tree. And that's the last ring.
A skew you using? Or a scraper?
Yep. Right here, what I did is on the fixed ring, I also went in a little ways, because when this last ring, if it gets too close, you still want it to look like it's sitting off the last fixed ring. So once you've got the rings all parted off, now I'm going to start working on the trunk. This is just like making a very big coat. You can make your trunk as thick or as thin as you want for speed. What I'm going to do is take my scraper and finish this off relatively quickly. Alright, call that good. Now I'm going to take my skew chisel back here and define the spot where I'm going to part it off. Right there. Now that you've got everything done except for the very, very top, that's one of the last things that we're going to do just before we part it off. So now it comes time to sand again. we're gonna call that good. At this time, I'm probably gonna put the finish back on the stuff that I've just completed. And then I'm gonna start working on the top. Once you get this, you want to bring the top to a point, and at this about this time, I'm going to eventually pull the tailstock away and finish up the very quick. All right, now the tip is done. You can go ahead and do a little sanding on the tip if you want to. And I'll go ahead and put some more finish on the tip, and then we're just about done.
How long are you waiting after applying that oil before proceeding?
35, 40 seconds. Tool so that I can get in, and it's not, I don't remove a lot of material. You also got to remember that you want to relieve some of the cuts as you're coming down to the end. And there you go. You have yourself a captive ring Christmas tree where the rings will come out. It's a fun little project. I enjoy doing this. Most of the stuff that I make is somewhere between 4 inches and 12 inches long. The longest Christmas tree that I have ever made was 36 inches long, and it had 127 rings. That took a little while to do, and it also requires a steady rest while you're doing it. I hope you enjoyed this demonstration. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask.
All right, thanks, Merle. We'll give me a second here, and I'll bring up the pictures.
While you're doing that, Merle, question for you. The tool rest space between the piece, because you have those rings tossing around on there when you're cutting up the rest of it, you know, the down by the base there and so forth. What do you do about that to make sure? Of course, you don't want those rings hitting the tool rest, right?
Oh, I usually leave it somewhere, about a ½ an inch away. Because you got to realize that the rings are spinning, but they're not going to spin more than what the thickness of the piece was. So even if you're going down to the end of it, you should still be about a ½ an inch away.
Okay.
But as the bigger rings get loose, they're now on a smaller diameter as they slide up, so they'll probably swing more, right?
Well, yeah, they will a little bit, but I've never had them hit the tool rest unless I hit the tool rest and it hit the piece.
All right, can you guys see the tools?
Yeah.
Okay, Merle, you just want to, so I have the pictures of the 2 tools up there.
The one on the left, the skew chisel, you need to get into a very tight area because at especially the top 3 or 4 rings, there isn't a lot of separation. They don't make a 1/4-inch skew. So what I did is I just went to Benjamin Best and bought a 1/2-inch skew chisel. It was like $10, and I took it to the grinder and ground half of it off. And then I do make the blade or the tip just a little bit longer and thinner. On the captive ring tool, which is on the right side, typically at the tip of the ones that I have both Crown and Hamlin. The tip at the top of it is about, I don't know, about a 1/16 or maybe 3/32 of an inch thick, which if you use it to cut the rings off, it cuts too much material off so that it really, the rings slide down the tree. So I just took it to the grinder and put a little flat spot so I could ride on my piece to cut the rings off, so I'm not removing as much material and the rings sit better on the tree.
How do you sharpen that, Merle?
Diamond credit card.
So just on the flat side?
Just on the flat sides. Once I took it off the grinder from reshaping it, it never sees the grinder again.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions for Merle?
I'd like to know more about that parting tool you used, that last tool. That's a wicked looking parting tool.
I used to make stems for wine glasses and ship them off to California. I like long-handled tools, and it's a thin parting tool. When I was parting off the bases of it, of the wine glasses, it would, if I moved a little bit, I'd end up breaking off the edges of the wine glass. So I just took the material off.
Nice job. Also, when you were shaping the tree, there was times 10 or 20 or 30 or something. You were doing it really fast. I mean, it was really flying by. But it looked like your last cut, you went backwards up. You drew the thing back up the tree with your skew chisel, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Well, most people are taught to just go with the grain, but it seems to me I always get the best cut coming backwards.
It just whatever the mood strikes me at the time.
Okay.
If I get my cut right the first time, then yeah.
Nice. Okay. Nice job.
Just don't try an aggressive cut that way.
No. No.
All right. Any other questions for Merle?
I just kind of more of a comment than a question. I do like the ring release tool, but they call them ring cutting tools, and it takes a beginner a little while to recognize that tool is not going to make a ring. You have to make the ring. That tool has only one job, and that's to help you release it. That's that last tiny bit of wood. You could sit there for an hour staring at it and saying, how am I going to make a bead out of this thing? Not going to work. That's your job with other tools.
That's actually a question, Merle, I had for you. So you created the cone and then you marked off the beads or the rings, but did you put a bead on the outside of those rings, or are they flat?
I have them pretty much flat.
Okay. Because you couldn't, I mean, they look like they had a bead on them kind of, but I never saw you do anything like that, so.
That's what sandpaper's for.
Yeah, you just knock the edges off, didn't you?
Okay.
Small.
That's why it looked like beads afterwards, okay.
Yeah, I just basically knock the edges off. And depending upon the species of the wood, sometimes I won't even sand the rings so that when you part them off and they sit on the tree, it kind of looks like pine cone or pine needles.
Okay, I see what you're saying, yeah.
Oh, I did think of a question. What's the best wood for doing this, and what woods will not hold those rings together?
The best woods that I found, of course, are cherry. Maple will do it. Walnut will do it. Stay away from any of the oaks. Mahogany is okay. But you know, I basically turn mostly domestic hardwoods anyway, and most of that is usually scrap from whatever I've cut off.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank Merle and Norm and Jeff for their presentations tonight. It's for those of you who have never done this, it's hard to appreciate how much work it takes even to make a 20-minute video. So and then the editing that Ted did and coordination. So it's actually a lot more work to do something with three presenters than it is with one. But I appreciate the work that everyone's put in for this tonight. Just to reiterate a couple things from the opening, watch out this week for your email this weekend for the notice about the wood sale. Again, it is a week from Saturday, or a week from tomorrow, and a week from this Saturday. So, and you know, these projects that you saw here tonight, we have the perfect wood for doing those if you need it. So, I just also want to mention that this morning I challenged the board, the 10 or 11 people on the board that said that they needed to set an example by paying their dues. And I wanted to be able to clap them on the back tonight for doing it. And I think as of now, the board is all current with 2021 dues. So that's a good example. I hope that you will all follow that example and go ahead and I feel like I'm doing an NPR fundraiser here.
Where's the tote bag?
Well, I don't know. Maybe we need a matching thing or something, but no, it will help us out immensely if you could go ahead and get your dues paid this month, and so we just know where we stand. And with that, unless anybody has any other comments, questions,
Yeah, just a thanks from me to the demonstrators as well, guys. And I know I put you through a lot of ropes getting it done, and I really do appreciate it. I think it turned out really well. So.